In 336 BCE, a 20-year-old king inherited the throne of Macedon after his father was assassinated at a wedding. 13 years later, he was dead. In those 13 years, Alexander III of Macedon, Alexander the Great, conquered the Persian Empire, Egypt, Central Asia, and northwestern India. He marched his army over 30,000 miles across some of the most brutal terrain on Earth. He fought in every major battle personally, was wounded multiple times, and never lost a single engagement. He founded over 70 cities, spread Greek language and culture from Egypt to the borders of China, and fundamentally reshaped the ancient world in ways that are still visible today. He was also, depending on which ancient source you read, a visionary genius, a paranoid murderer, a devoted friend, a ruthless conqueror, a philosopher king, and a man who genuinely believed he was the son of a god, possibly all of these at the same time. But here is the question that historians have argued about for 2,000 years and still cannot answer. What exactly was Alexander trying to do? Was he following a plan? Was he chasing glory? Was he running from something? And why, when his army finally refused to go further, did he weep? This is Alexander the Great. Alexander was born in 356 BCE in Pella, the capital of Macedon. His father was Philip II, one of the most capable military and political minds of the ancient world. His mother was Olympias, a fierce, intensely religious woman from Epirus, who told Alexander from childhood that his real father was not Philip, but Zeus, that he was divine. Alexander believed her, or at least he found the belief useful, possibly both. Philip was transforming Macedon from a semi-barbaric kingdom on Greece's northern frontier into the dominant military power in the Greek world. He reformed the Macedonian army, developing the sarissa, an 18-foot pike that gave his infantry an enormous reach advantage, and combining it with the most effective heavy cavalry in the ancient world into a system of coordinated warfare that nobody else could match. Alexander grew up watching this army being built and trained. He also grew up being educated by Aristotle, whom Philip hired as his son's tutor when Alexander was 13. For 3 years, the greatest philosopher of the ancient world taught Alexander philosophy, science, medicine, rhetoric, and literature. Alexander's favorite book was the Iliad. He kept a copy annotated by Aristotle under his pillow, along with a dagger. He identified with Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Trojan War, who chose a short, glorious life over a long, obscure one. This was not a casual literary preference. It was a life template. At 18, Alexander commanded the cavalry at the Battle of Chaeronea, where Philip defeated the combined forces of Athens and Thebes and established Macedonian dominance over Greece. Alexander's cavalry charge broke the sacred band of Thebes, an elite force of 150 pairs of lovers who had never been defeated, completely. Then Philip was assassinated. The circumstances were murky. Ancient sources point in several directions. Alexander moved immediately and decisively, securing the throne, eliminating rivals, and reasserting Macedonian control over the Greek city-states that had immediately begun revolting at news of Philip's death. Before Alexander could look east toward Persia, he had to send a message to Greece, and that would not be forgotten. And what he did was so extreme, so deliberately terrifying, that it shocked every Greek city-state into immediate silence. He destroyed an entire city, and the city he chose made the message unmistakable. Thebes had revolted at news of Philip's death, encouraged by false rumors that Alexander himself had been killed in a northern campaign. When Alexander marched south and appeared outside their walls very much alive, Thebes had a choice: surrender or fight. They fought. It was the wrong decision. Alexander destroyed Thebes in 335 BCE. The city was razed. Its population, around 30,000 people, was sold into slavery. Only the temples and the house of the poet Pindar were left standing, a deliberate signal that Alexander respected culture, even as he obliterated resistance. The message landed perfectly. Athens, which had been preparing to resist, sent an immediate delegation of submission. Every Greek city-state fell into line. Alexander's rear was secure. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strait between Europe and Asia, with an army of roughly 37,000 men. Before landing, he threw a spear into the Asian shore from his ship, symbolically claiming the continent as won by the spear. He then visited Troy, honoring the grave of Achilles, his hero. He was 22 years old, and he was about to attack the largest empire on earth. The Persian Empire under Darius III was still enormous. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, vast wealth, a professional army. But Darius III was not Darius I or Xerxes. He was an adequate administrator and a poor battlefield commander who had come to power in messy circumstances and had not yet been seriously tested. He was about to be. Alexander defeated the Persians in 3 major pitched battles, each one more decisive than the last. At the Granicus River in 334 BCE, Alexander charged across a river directly into the Persian cavalry, personally leading from the front in a style that would characterize every battle of his career and nearly get him killed multiple times. The Persians were routed. At Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander faced Darius III himself for the first time. Darius commanded a massive army. Ancient sources say hundreds of thousands. Modern historians estimate somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000. Alexander had around 40,000. The terrain at Issus funneled the Persian army into a narrow coastal plain where their numbers were a disadvantage rather than an asset. Alexander's oblique attack, led by the companion cavalry personally, broke the Persian line and sent Darius fleeing from the field, abandoning his mother, wife, and children in his camp. Alexander treated Darius's captured family with complete courtesy. They were housed, fed, and treated as royalty rather than prisoners. When told that Darius's wife was the most beautiful woman in Asia and that Alexander had every right to her, he reportedly replied that it would be shameful to be conquered by women when he had come to conquer men. Whether he actually said this, it reflects something real about how Alexander presented himself as a liberator and successor rather than simply a conqueror. After Issus, Alexander didn't immediately chase Darius east. Instead, he moved south, systematically taking the Persian coastal cities to eliminate the Persian navy's ports. This included the siege of Tyre, which we covered in the Phoenician episode, where Alexander built the famous causeway to take the island city. Then Egypt, which welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. The Egyptian priests declared him the son of Amun, their chief god equated with Zeus, confirming what his mother had always told him. He founded Alexandria on the Egyptian coast, the first and most famous of his many cities, which would become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. In 331 BCE, at Gaugamela in modern-day Iraq, Alexander met Darius one final time. Darius had assembled an even larger army on flat terrain, specifically chosen to give his scythed chariots and superior numbers room to operate. Alexander's response was tactically brilliant. He deliberately angled his attack to draw the Persian line out of formation, then drove the companion cavalry through the gap directly at Darius himself. Darius fled again. This time he kept fleeing. He was eventually murdered by his own general Bessus before Alexander could capture him. Alexander gave him a royal funeral. With Persia defeated, Alexander had achieved what he had set out to do. He could have gone home. Every rational calculation said, stop here. Instead, he kept going, and what he did next, and who he became in the process, would push his men to the edge of mutiny and cost him some of his closest friends. After Gaugamela, Alexander pressed on. He burned the Persian ceremonial capital of Persepolis, allegedly on the suggestion of an Athenian courtesan named Thais. in revenge for the Persian burning of Athens 150 years earlier. Whether or not Thais suggested it, Alexander later said he regretted it. He then spent 3 years campaigning in Central Asia, modern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, fighting a grinding guerrilla war against local resistance that was far more difficult than the pitched battles against Persia. He crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains twice, in winter conditions that killed men and animals by the hundreds. During this period, Alexander began changing in ways that alarmed his Macedonian companions. He adopted Persian dress and customs. He began requiring visitors to prostrate themselves before him, a practice called proskynesis, which was normal Persian court protocol but deeply offensive to Macedonians, who prostrated themselves only before gods. He also killed 2 of his closest friends. At a drunken banquet, his companion, Cletus the Black, who had saved Alexander's life at the Granicus, taunted him about his Persian pretensions and implied that Philip had been the real military genius. Alexander threw a javelin through him. He immediately fell into grief and self-reproach, so severe that his officers had to drag him out of it. Later, his court historian Callisthenes was executed for allegedly participating in a conspiracy, though the evidence was thin. Callisthenes had publicly opposed the prostration requirement. The message was clear. Criticism of Alexander had become dangerous. In 326 BCE, Alexander crossed the Indus River into northwestern India and defeated the Indian king Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes River. Porus fought with war elephants, which terrified Alexander's cavalry horses. Alexander won through tactical ingenuity, crossing the river at night in a storm to attack from an unexpected direction. After the battle, Alexander asked the captured Porus how he wished to be treated. Porus replied, "As a king." Alexander restored his kingdom and made him an ally. It was one of the most generous decisions of his campaign. Alexander wanted to keep going. Beyond India lay more kingdoms, more territory, and according to his understanding of geography, possibly the edge of the world and the great ocean that surrounded it. His army refused. They had been marching for 8 years. They were 10,000 miles from home. Their equipment was worn out, their bodies were exhausted, and many of them had wives and children they had never seen. When Alexander called his officers together and asked them to continue, his general Coenus spoke for the army. The men wanted to go home. They had done enough. They had conquered enough. Alexander withdrew to his tent for 3 days. Ancient sources say he wept. He made sacrifices and asked the omens whether he should cross the river. The omens were unfavorable. He announced to his men that they would turn back. The army erupted in cheering and weeping. Men who had faced Persian cavalry, mountain passes, desert heat, and monsoon rains broke down in relief. Alexander turned west for the first time in his campaign. He never stopped being Alexander, though. The march back through the Gedrosian desert, a deliberate choice apparently to emulate a legendary queen who had tried and failed to cross it, was a catastrophe that killed perhaps a quarter of the army through heat, thirst, and starvation. His officers were furious. His men suffered terribly. And Alexander pressed on. Alexander returned to Babylon in 323 BCE, planning new campaigns. Arabia was next, then possibly a circumnavigation of Africa. His ambitions showed no sign of shrinking. In June of 323 BCE, after a prolonged banquet and heavy drinking, Alexander fell ill. He developed a fever that worsened over 10 days. He lost the ability to speak. On the 11th day, he died. He was 32 years old. The cause of death has been debated ever since. Theories include typhoid fever complicated by other factors, excessive alcohol consumption destroying his liver over years of heavy drinking, poisoning by his generals or by Aristotle acting through an agent, and a rare neurological condition called Guillain-Barré syndrome that may have caused his death and could explain reports that his body showed no decomposition for several days after death, possibly because he was not actually dead yet when declared so. We do not know. We will probably never know. When his officers asked Alexander who should inherit his empire, he reportedly said either to the strongest or gave a name that ancient sources disagree on. Some say he said Craterus, some say Perdiccas, some say he said nothing at all. Within a generation, his generals had divided his empire among themselves and were at war with each other. His son was murdered. His mother was murdered. His wife was murdered. Almost everyone who had been close to him died violently in the power struggles that followed. The empire he had built in 13 years fractured into pieces within 20 years of his death. And yet, the Greek language spread by Alexander's conquests became the common language of the Eastern Mediterranean world for centuries. It was the language in which the New Testament was written. It was the language in which Greek philosophy reached Rome, Egypt, and Persia. The cultural fusion Alexander set in motion, Greek ideas mixing with Persian, Egyptian, Babylonian, and Indian thought, produced the Hellenistic world, one of the most intellectually creative periods in history. Alexandria, the city he founded in Egypt, became the greatest center of learning in the ancient world. Its library held hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Its scholars produced advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and geography that wouldn't be surpassed for over 1,000 years. Julius Caesar wept at a statue of Alexander because he had done so little by comparison at the same age. Augustus Caesar kept a signet ring with Alexander's image. Napoleon studied his campaigns obsessively. Every subsequent conqueror measured himself against Alexander. He was 32 years old when he died. He had ruled for 13 years. He had never lost a battle. Whether he was a genius or a monster, and the evidence supports both, he was without question the most consequential individual of the ancient world. The world he left behind was unrecognizably different from the one he had inherited. No single person before or since has changed the map of human civilization so completely, so quickly. Alexander died in 323 BCE, and his empire died with him, at least as a unified political entity. But what he had set in motion could not be undone. The world after Alexander was the Hellenistic world, a vast zone of Greek language, Greek culture, and Greek ideas stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia, ruled by his successors, but shaped by the fusion of cultures his conquests had produced. Next time on Drawn from History, the Hellenistic world after Alexander. 3 successor kingdoms dividing the empire. The Library of Alexandria and the greatest concentration of human knowledge the ancient world ever assembled. And the slow rise of a new power in the West that was about to change everything. A small city on the Tiber River in Italy that nobody yet took seriously. Until then, this has been Drawn from History. Thanks for watching.